but we are looking now at the entrepreneurs who are changing women's health. And I'm really excited to be moderating this panel because it's not only a topic I'm personally passionate about, but something that we really try to cover actively on Women's Agenda. All three of the brilliant women who are with us today have been featured at various times on site, and they have shared their amazing ideas and technologies in ensuring that our health needs and experiences women are understood and prioritised. So please welcome Alison Harrington, is a passionate social entrepreneur and founder of Respark, a pioneering SaaS platform that uses personalised music and video experiences through wireless headphones to provide therapeutic outcomes for people living with dementia. With Respark supporting over 280 aged care homes across Australia and New Zealand now, Alison is working to transform the ageing experience. We also have Etta Watts-Russell, who is the innovative mind behind Lactamo, a clinically validated, world-first device designed to support breastfeeding mothers. She was inspired by her own challenges with breastfeeding for children. She created Lactamo to provide solutions for common breastfeeding issues faced by 92% of mothers. And Lisa Nguyen is a pharmacist and the founder and CEO of Astrid, Australia's first boutique female-led dispensary specialising in medicinal cannabis. With extensive experience in the medicinal cannabis sector, Lisa left the corporate world in 2020 to create a patient-centred dispensary that challenges the stigma around cannabis. Please welcome my three next panellists. Thank you so much for being here. And as I said, I am so excited to be chairing this session because I think it's a huge area that we need to focus on, that we perhaps don't focus on enough, which is, the entrepreneurs in the women's health space that are really championing some incredible innovative technologies, and each of you is doing just that. So Etta, I'll start with you because you turned a personal challenge into a global innovation with Lactamo. What were some of the key obstacles you faced in those kind of early days of development, and how did you overcome them to bring the product to market?
Thanks, Tarla. So, I think that there were obvious challenges in the innovation space that I'd anticipated at the beginning. Getting, clinical compliance, independent clinical trials in the IP space. So lots of challenges that I'd expected. But one challenge that I really hadn't anticipated was in the education and awareness that was required to bring Lactamo to market. And that was really not just from the mother's perspective, but also the healthcare perspective and just the wider industry in that space. And so, some of the conversations that I had, I've got very thick skin, but some of the conversations were just, real eye-openers in that space. There was one particular healthcare executive who's been a healthcare executive for many decades, and he said that in his entire career in that position and working in public hospitals and private hospitals, the word breastfeeding had never been uttered in any of his meetings at his level. And that really, was not just an isolated conversation. There was another healthcare executive who, when he heard what I was doing with Lactamo, he said to me, well, I can't remember my wife breastfeeding, so what problem are you trying to solve? And it was just, just incredibly interesting. And so I think that awareness of the problem is often half of the solution, and of really sort of understanding that. And, those conversations then extended in sort of, I suppose, areas of bureaucracy, if you could call it that. So, even after we've achieved all these different milestones, which should be the sort of, as I said, I thought would be the focus points of, the clinical validation, compliance, and, all of those, what we achieved in hospital pilots, we'd have full buy-in from hospital executives, but they would say, well, where would we put this? There's no category for this, whether it's on our websites or in what we do there. So I think all of those different conversations weren't areas where I thought that that education and awareness would be necessary. I suppose I had just really seen myself a problem, a solution, that unmet need, and so that's really obvious. And so seeing that there was a lot of work to be done behind the scenes in that sort of the wider concept at the table there was really interesting to me. And I think that perhaps in that innovation space, especially in healthcare, especially in women's healthcare, that really should have been something that I should have anticipated, because we are sort of breaking barriers in a lot of ways, and we're opening up conversations that haven't been had before. So it's been a really interesting journey. There's been so many different pivots for me in that space, but that was one that was unexpected.
I love that notion of what category, like where does this fit? It's like, well, maybe you actually create a new category at this point.
And that's exciting that, that you are pioneering, that you're innovating in that space. But it's a surprising remark. And so, as I said, I think that sort of awareness and those key decision makers, we really need to include them in that conversation in such an integral way there.
Lisa, Astrid isn't just a dispensary, but it's a movement towards destigmatising medicinal cannabis, which we know does still profoundly exist. How do you balance the innovative aspects of what you're doing against the outdated kind of moral outrage that exists?
It's a good question. I think that when I founded Astrid, it was always to remove the stigma associated with medicinal cannabis. I've been in the medicinal cannabis space for almost 7-8 years. And when I started, my role was educating doctors and pharmacists and being involved in clinical trials and teaching doctors that there isn't a therapeutic application for this, that medicinal cannabis, even though it was illicit for so many years, it is now legal as a prescription medicine in Australia for patients to use it for pain, mood and sleep. And it is up to clinicians and doctors and pharmacists to actually educate patients. So I think education with healthcare professionals is one thing. When I started Astrid, and the reason I started Astrid was because despite all the education that we were doing, and I remember in the very early days when I was on the road seeing doctors every day with my suitcase in my little suit, and I had a lot of, a briefcase full of evidence to show doctors, they would just dismiss me and they called me a drug dealer, and they said that this is not a valid medicine because it's a drug and, it belongs on the streets. And that was probably around 2017 to 2018 in the very early days. There weren't very many cannabis companies around then. Now, fast forward, 5-6 years, there's over 800 products in the market. But in the early days, there wasn't many products, and so because there was lack of awareness, doctors were very afraid. I saw a gap in the market for access for patients because one of my roles was to actually go and educate pharmacists, and I remember standing very clearly in a pharmacy that was very white walls in between Hydrolite and Panadol, and watching a patient trying to access their cannabis with a pharmacist who had no idea what they were doing, and the patient was feeling really shamed, and I saw the stigma translate in front of me, and I kept seeing that over and over again, and I kept, telling my peers about it, but no one would listen to me, and I got really annoyed and really frustrated. And so after about 6 months of building business plans for other people and trying to prove to them that this thing could work, I decided to do it myself and build a beautiful space that allowed people to speak normally about cannabis, normalise the cannabis conversation and feel safe accessing cannabis in a place where there is healthcare professionals who know how to educate and support patients on their cannabis journey.
I will put my hand up and say that after the birth of my first son, I suffered from the most debilitating chronic insomnia. And medicinal cannabis was quite literally the thing that absolutely was a game changer for me. But I will say that there was that level of, shame around what I was doing. And I would try to advocate for it and try to have open conversations with friends around what what I was doing. And even at that point, and this was in 2020, I did feel like there was, that extra kind of scrutiny and almost like, a stress around what I was voicing to them as though it was really problematic. And it's so funny because you see people, actually have very real problems, real addictions with pharmaceutical drugs very much approved in our system, and it is just baffling to me that kind of stigma and shame does exist.
Exactly, and I think in 2020 there was a huge stigma. I remember when I first got my first cannabis job, I told my close friends, and they said to me, "Are you sure it's legit? Have you looked into the company?" I'm like, "Yes, I've got a contract and they've paid me 2 paychecks already, and I think it's legit." And so there was, 2020, a lot of unknowns, and, it's been illicit for so long, and so people don't know how to deal with that.
Yeah. Also, I grew up in Canberra, so I should have been very much fine with it, but I wasn't. Alison, Respark has been absolutely transformative in the lives of people living with dementia, which is the number 1 cause of death for women in this country. What inspired you to merge technology with therapy, and also what kind of led you to that? What impact have you also seen so far in the aged care sector since operating in this space?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it is a crazy idea, and I'm just going to give you a little context. The first thing is it is a massive problem area that people don't speak about as a number 1 killer of women in Australia, and also women disproportionately bear all the burden of care. I'm supporting so many girlfriends at the moment through their parents living with dementia, and have calls on a regular basis. I now, because I'm in the space, and I'm happy to help people, but boy, there's a tsunami ahead of us with what's going on. So I came into the space because I realised there wasn't a lot of innovation in the space, and what was happening to me personally was my father-in-law, Arthur, had dementia. He was living in an aged care home, and he would get very agitated and unsettled in the afternoons. Many times we came in and we honestly thought he'd had a stroke because he was completely out of it and sedated. And at the same time, I'd gone back, I'd been in technology, I was studying social impact because I wanted to do something with all my tech skills. And we had to do an assignment on a novel idea for seniors. And I love dancing, and I saw silent disco, and I thought, wow, we could kind of combine all of these things. And I'd started reading a lot about the impact of music for dementia. And the research was so clear that it worked. It was just so clear. I'm going, why are people using this? And I guess I started to go in and sit with him just with my phone, and I started doing that in the afternoons, and he always loved Fly Me to the Moon. He was from Holland, so I played him all the Dutch music. And it was just transformational. I mean, why aren't we doing this? So I guess from an entrepreneur's perspective, I'm going, why can't we do this at scale? So that really set me, I guess, on the journey. And I find myself 4.5 years later with this business, really trying to do it at scale. And it's not easy, as a lot of panellists. We're always pioneers. We're trying to do something different, particularly in Australia. There's not a lot of education around it. So I think the impact, though, that we've been able to make from a very small start just before the pandemic is that we've trained about 5,000 carers. We've impacted about 25,000 residents. And I think the key for us, which we'll probably hear a lot more about in the panel, is about when you're developing these technologies in healthcare, it's actually about being able to prove it qualitatively and quantitatively. So we really had to do trials, and the impact, we've been able to reduce psychotropics. Some of the trials have been 12%. Tomorrow, the next 2 days, is the International Dementia Conference, and we're publishing another paper where we've been able to go in and demonstrate we can use music and music therapy to reduce some of the moderate to mild behaviours by almost like 100%. And then for me personally, the impact is literally seeing the stories every single day on when our teams are hearing from what's happening in the aged care homes, seeing the photos, the stories. So, for me, thinking, can we do it? Absolutely. But now it's a journey of actually doing that education with the market and proving we can scale it out. So,
I have a question for all three of you. Oh, I should really stop hitting that lapel mic. I want to ask about the role that you each think that women's personal experiences play in driving innovation in health and wellbeing. Obviously, for you, Etta, it was very much a personal challenge that you experienced, and Alison And Lisa, you've shared your experiences as well as of understanding what the barriers were in those spaces and having lived experience of seeing loved ones go through challenges. But how can we ensure that more women's voices and experiences are kind of heard and met in the area of entrepreneurialism in health?
If I'll start, thanks, Tarla. So, I think definitely my business started because of my own personal experience. I had gone into motherhood just assuming that childbirth was the only difficult part. Breastfeeding's natural; it should be easy, so I thought. And so it wasn't on my radar as a potential difficulty, and I didn't have my expectations managed in that way. And I really struggled. I felt like a failure at one of my most vulnerable points in life, the start of motherhood in that way. And so certainly that personal experience has really driven my determination and my passion. I think there's a real indignance there to make sure that other women have a better experience than I did. I would say if they choose to breastfeed, breastfeeding isn't everyone's choice, and that's a very personal choice, so there's no judgment on that there. But I think just seeing also not just my personal experience, but then understanding the wider unmet need. The statistics are just staggering. I think Angela made some reference to some similar women's statistics just in the opening this morning, and really the breastfeeding statistics are no better than that. Every dollar invested in breastfeeding generates $35 in economic returns. So there's that huge incentive if you need an economics incentive there. But then just, the stats of women not being able to breastfeed that no country in the world meets the recommended standards. I think we've set a policy standard of 100% exclusive breastfeeding to 6 months. We had a big push over the last few years, which has really pumped it up, but it's only got to 37.5% in Australia. So we've got so much more work to do. And I think really it comes down to, for me, women having, there aren't enough women's voices at the table. And I don't just mean women's voices, as I was talking before, in terms of the C-suite, the healthcare executives. It's every woman's voice. It's my woman's voice of having experienced that personally. It's everybody talking about it in society. It's podcasts, it's TV exposure, it's all of that in the media. It's events like this as well. And so I think bringing all of that together is just so important in that piece.
Yeah.
So for me, I think I'd like to share a personal story. So 7 days ago, I underwent surgery because for the last 8 or so months I've been on a fertility journey, and so I've had 4 miscarriages. So thank you, Sam, for all your support and what you do. I was really inspired by your talk. But going through my surgery, they discovered that I have endometriosis 7 days ago, and for the last 8 months I didn't know what the problem was and what the reason for my infertility. And I'm sharing this story because there's a lot of things that women go through during a fertility journey, and when I look at my role as a founder and a CEO, there's also a sense of responsibility as well on how I handle these situations and how the people in my team and also my patients get influenced by how I tackle certain situations. I think as a founder and as a CEO, there is an expectation to be the strong, kind of fierce founder kind of woman. But I think my strength is that I'm a very soft and a very vulnerable and a very, authentic leader. And so throughout my whole journey over the last 8 months, I've told my team every single time I've gone through something. And so they've been with me throughout the whole journey. I've got a team of 30 pharmacists, doctors and nurses and assistants, and they're really, really beautiful people. And I'm really big on leading by example. And I believe that is how innovation can happen, because if I can influence them to understand empathetically what I'm going through, then they can help other patients. We have a lot of patients that suffer from endometriosis who use medicinal cannabis for their symptoms.
Yeah.
And me going through my journey has also inspired other women to come out of the woodworks, share their stories as well. I think, women are expected to bounce back. And there was a situation, at home, and I've come from a very big Vietnamese family. And a few weeks ago, I had just gone through another miscarriage, and my uncle told me that I shouldn't eat any more cake because I'm fat and I've gained too much weight. And I think as a Vietnamese person, I'm told not to speak up. And so in that moment, even though I'm a strong founder, vulnerable CEO, I said nothing. I was silent in that moment. And then I came home and I cried for 24 hours.
Yeah.
But then what I did was I had a hard conversation with my uncle and I said, what you said was not okay and I've been through a lot and women shouldn't have to bounce back after 4 miscarriages, especially if they are suffering from things like endometriosis and blocked tubes and God knows what else, anxiety, insomnia. And then I went to work the next day and I told my team about it. 2 weeks later, 2 of my pharmacists told me that they went to the gynecologist and they got diagnosed with endo as well because they were inspired by my story. And so I think as leaders, we innovate by influencing people immediately around us, but also our community as well.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's incredibly brave. And I think it is it's also unfathomably hard to comprehend as well. Again, it's a cultural expectation. These things, these conversations we have are different. There are social and cultural issues at play that it becomes far more complex, and I can imagine my Indian grandfather having that exact same conversation with me, and to be able to then go away after feeling that shame and then address it with him, I think is really courageous, but also very important and very hard. So thank you. Alison, I'm interested in your thoughts on that as well, because I think it is a question that,
Look, I definitely agree with everybody else on the panel, like being able to have those open conversations. I think with dementia there's a lot of stigma about that, and it's interesting for me to experience a lot of people coming to me, I haven't really told anybody, but I'm battling. It's like this silent, we've had so many conversations, like lots of parallels about these silent conversations that don't happen, and we're dealing with it all. We're listening to former panel talking about managing young children, but we're also then managing ageing parents, and it's only going to get worse. And I think the other comment I would have about women having these personal stories, I think my challenge as I've gone through and hear so many people's personal stories is to translate that to a business case. Because in terms of actually running a business and scaling a business, and I wanted to make sure this was sustainable and scalable when I built this, because if I'm going to put all my energy into creating impact, I don't want it to be gone in like a year or 2 years. So I think what I've learned on my journey is how I have to get into, CEO, executive level presentations, and I've actually got to prove that I can show tons of happy faces and all of that, like to your point, Etta, we all can tell these amazing stories, but to shift the dial and to change the way people do things, and from a business perspective, for people to see the return on investment. I know that sounds, but that is actually the reality of people signing the check. As I've learned in my journey of, dealing with organisations, that you've actually got to be able to prove the business case, and that's about research, it's about productivity, it's about if you invest the money here, this is exactly to your point. So I think for me, it's the challenge is how do you turn that personal story into a business case, and you can have both. And you need to have both to have a successful business.
I guess extrapolating from that, I'm interested in all of your advice to women here and elsewhere who may be, seeing a gap in market and really wanting to, press play on developing that business. How do you break into the industry successfully, and how do you kind of work around challenges like the immense lack of funding that's coming from VC funds into female-founded companies? What are some of the key some of the key kind of tips that you would have? Etta, I might start with you.
I think really I think your existing skill set is going to be really important in that. And so coming from a corporate background, that was really helpful for me. There was certainly areas that I could draw from in that. Any areas that I had to upskill in, I could focus on that as well and, outsource some of that in that way. And I think that in any sort of area that you come from, though, there's going to be different aspects that you bring to the table there. I would say that my passion and determination was really key in bringing that to the table, regardless of what my background was. I really had seen that problem, that solution, that unmet need, and that was so important. But what I would say, I think that the generosity of the community in the women's health space in particular, and in just in general, in that female entrepreneur space, is incredible. And I think even though the statistics are dire at the moment, I do believe that, from here, the only way is up. And in a really exciting way, not in a resignatory way. I think that there's so much passion and determination. Yeah. And going back to that indignance that I felt before as well, to really change this and to say, how can we make this better for women in the future? And to really take that forward from there. So I think that there's a lot of support. There's been a lot of bad press, rightly so, on the negative statistics in female-funded businesses. But I do think, as I said, we're on the up from there. There's really exciting changes being made. It was inspiring to hear from Jed Kearney this morning, just in terms of what she's doing in the women's health space. And it's so exciting to see such a progressive leader really actually addressing those problems. It's not just a laminated policy that'll sit and gather dust. It's her actually making those changes. So I do think that there's a growing community, and from here, I'm really excited to see the changes that can be made to better support women and women's health in the future.
And certainly conversations like this help. Lisa, what are your thoughts on that?
So Astrid is self-funded, so my family and I raised our own cash during the pandemic, and so we bootstrapped the whole thing. And it's interesting because we've scaled the business over the last 3.5 years from just myself as the first employee to now 30 people, and with that requires a lot of cash flow needs. I'm not very with money. I'm not a very good money person. I'm very big on ideas, but money scares me. And so, but what I do know is that I have very good intuition, and so I have a very good gut, and that even though I've got great ideas and I'm very ambitious, I'm very passionate, and I know what I want, I also know what I don't want. And so recently we've been approached by a few investors, and interesting, I've been in a lot of executive rooms with a lot of men in suits and asking me to pitch my business. And I pitched my business, and they're very impressed. But the first question they ask is, "How did you do it?" And the second thing they say is, "You've got a lot of really great ideas for a little girl."
Oh wow!
And so. For me, it's a no-brainer. I walk out of the room and I'm like, I don't need your cash. And so I think... So my takeaway from this is values are really important, because if you take money from investment, it comes with strings, and it should be value-driven. If they're adding value to your business and they come with an advisory board that have extensive experience and you're aligned in what you want to achieve and the mission and the goals, then I think that's amazing. And I think a lot of female funded VC funds, that's where the value is, and I think that's really beautiful, because we can protect each other there. But I've been in rooms where there are men who are sharks, and as women we just have to know when to walk away.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable advice. Alison?
Yeah, well, the interesting stat is actually female-founded businesses statistically do better from VC funding than male-founded businesses. There was a Boston Consulting Group study on that. So I really hope it's starting to change as well. I sense that that's happening as well, and there's some really great initiatives around that. I was actually a recipient of the federal government Female Founders Grant about 2 years ago. That was actually quite transformational for me to be able to get the business really going. So I think seeing governments actively supporting women is really important. And just going back to the nutshell of what do you do if you're trying to start a business in this space. And I think the best thing I would ever advise people, just completely fall in love with the problem, which I think every single person on this panel has, and then just test it at the most basic level as quickly as possible. Like prototype it. Like I think the number of people I've met going, I'm spending 3 weeks coming up with a logo. I'm going, just get in and test the solution to see if there's even a business there, and would someone even pay for it? Can you actually create? And that's what I was doing when I went to the aged care home with and I've got photos, and then I went to about 4 other homes just with my iPhone, seeing if it would actually even work. And this was actually a side hustle for me, probably for 2 or 3 years while I was running another business, when I was kind of coming up with this idea. So kind of getting the side hustle going and really validating the idea. And for me, the other really important thing on the journey was actually getting that first testimonial customer who just believed in what you were doing. They took a risk. That's the home I'm presenting, Twilight Aged Care, if anybody wants to know. They're a little home, a little network of homes. I'm presenting them at the Dementia Conference, and they're still on the journey with me. And they've actually been, I remember the CEO goes, oh, look, Alison, I think this is a bit like crazy, but yeah, we'll do it. We'll go on board. They were our first customers, and they're still with us today doing amazing research, and it always takes someone that first testimonial customer to take the punt on you. So I would just advise people to do those steps at the very beginning.
Very sound advice, for sure. You mentioned validation there, and it kind of led me onto wanting to ask another question. But I'm interested in what the most kind of validating moment you've experienced, or the most kind of illuminating thing that's happened to you since running the business that's just solidified your entire purpose. Etta?
Yeah, I think there's different ways that you can look at that. There's, business success. How do you define that? And you can look at it from an investor's perspective, and that can be financial in terms of, reaching certain milestones and, certain sales or whatever. But I think what it comes down to for me, and I think Sam and Alison, you've made such reference to this as well, is that feedback. When you get that feedback, especially because I'm coming to this journey, I'm approaching this journey from an emotional perspective myself, of saying that's not good enough. I felt, just so much like a failure at the start of motherhood myself. So how can I change that? And I think when mothers come back and they give those testimonials of, you've saved my breastfeeding journey, this was something that was really important to me, and you've given me a solution, you've given me support. So to me, that's what it comes down to. It started with the heart, and it's always about the heart in that way. But I appreciate from an investor perspective, there's more to it than that. But that's the North Star for me.
Yeah. Lisa?
I think I'm the same. I think it's patient stories. It's always been about patient stories for me. That's why I started. But I think, and like as a pharmacist, I have the privilege of hearing stories every day, and hearing patients tell me their journeys and how they used to access black market cannabis, and they're so glad they don't have to go down the alleyway behind 7-Eleven anymore, and they can come to a beautiful space and access cannabis with really like lovely people teaching them about how to access, and also in them explaining to me how this plant has quite honestly transformed their lives, that it's decreased their chronic pain, they can sleep better, they can have more transparent conversations with their families because they can think clearly. And so it's like those little moments that really make it for me.
Yeah. How many women come through Astrid compared to men? I'm just interested.
Yeah. So we've had over 20,000 patients come through us over the last 3.5 years, and 60% of our patients are women.
Yeah. Mm. And of all ages?
Of all ages, actually, very surprisingly.
Yeah. Good to know. Alison?
Well, it's kind of the same. I'm just going to leave you with one little story, and this is what we're finding really interesting with the program about, I don't know if people know this, but showering is a really challenging thing for some people living with dementia, and it's something we've been tackling a lot. And I just love this story because it just encapsulates what we do. And, version 1 for Bob, let's call him, in Tasmania, was it took 3 people to get him into the shower. It was very stressful. Like, that whole thing was 45 minutes. We started training the team in Respark. Turns out he loves Christmas carols. So you know what, every morning we put the Christmas carols on. Everybody's very happy. He sings kind of jingle bells, listens for 10 minutes, and then very happily gets into the shower. So that is like a little story of many, many stories. Thank you. And I think the other thing is just the recognition. Like events like this, I was fortunate enough to be recognised, which is where I met you, at the Cartier Women's Initiative. It's a global award for female impact entrepreneurs, and I was lucky enough to be selected and to go to an award ceremony. And I think it's a really tough journey being an entrepreneur. It's a tough journey in the purpose space when you're coming from the heart. I didn't actually start out to like build this crazy scale-up business. I actually started out to create impact. And to be able to get recognition, I do very strongly remember that one moment standing on the stage going, oh, wow, this is really special. So I think recognition, and I think women don't put themselves forward often for a lot of like startup, like, you know, we're very reluctant, and this was a female-only award, but I think having the recognition and profiling success is really important as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm conscious of time and the fact that everyone is probably getting peckish, but please join me in thanking the brilliant Alison Harrington, Lisa Nguyen and Etta Watts-Russell.